soldiers better move slow. Attack dog for the truth. Nigga, cool dog.
Yes, Shalom Israel. We are the I.S.U.P.K out of 1 West, 125th Street, Harlem, New York, under Commander GEN.YAHANNA. We've been teaching this truth about the Bible since 1969. That the blacks, the Hispanics, and the Native Indians are the lost 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. Right? Today, we're gonna get a little bit onto the topic about the Chinese. Right, a little brief history about the Chinese in Trinidad and Tobago. All right, but before I do that, right, I'd just like to remind all the viewers watching, right, that we have classes all through the week locally here in Trinidad and Tobago. All right, on Sundays, we have the scripture breakdown, right, with our camp leader, priest and officer Galawan. All right, on Mondays we have the history class, which is tonight. Right, this class is usually done by priest and officer Makar Kobal. Right, but I am officer Maikwa. Right, I will be holding on the class on behalf of him tonight. Right, so tonight would be the Monday night history class. On Tuesdays we have the brotherhood class, which is done by priest and officer Sowapiala. All right, he does the brotherhood class on a Tuesday, which is tomorrow. All right, on Wednesdays we have the law class, which is done by priest and officer Matt Kwayak. Right, on a Thursday we do not have any classes locally. All right, but from time to time we stream the classes straight out of Harlem, New York, with 12 Shield General Mahaiman, which is a pretty good class. You can also ask your question, any question you want about the Bible in that class. Right, on Fridays we have the Lashon Kodash, right, or the Hebrew tongue or the Hebrew language. All right, here in the I.S.U.P.K we read, write, and speak Hebrew, right? The ancient Hebrew, which is the Paleo Hebrew, and the modern Hebrew, which is known as the Assyrian Hebrew, right? That is on a Friday, and this is done by priest and officer Yakad, all right? And on a Saturday is the Sabbath service, which is done by priest and officer Yakad and also priest and officer Sowapiala, right? From time to time, you may see other brothers interchange, right? And that Sabbath class is from 10 a.m. in the morning, right? All the other classes during the week is from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. locally here in Trinidad and Tobago, right? So now that we finish about the classes, right? We're gonna get straight into the topic, right? And this is just a brief history about the Chinese people here in Trinidad, all right? And normally people hear about the Chinese, right, locally here in Trinidad, and how it seems to happen. It seems that somehow they're coming straight from China and entering into Trinidad. And when they enter into Trinidad, right, yes, they work, but they don't usually start from the bottom. Somehow, right, they seem to get like a little kickstart, and all of a sudden, you're just seeing them working, they would already be working, having their own groceries, restaurants, right? And having their own business already set up, even though they came into Trinidad as an immigrant, and but they don't seem to be starting from zero, right? And when you look at the Black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man, he ends up now having to start from the bottom, and he's wondering, well, how come all these other nations as seem to be getting this jump start and this kickstart, right? And they always, it appears like they always ahead of us, right? So we were going to get in a little bit about that history, right? But for the first, before we get into that, right, we will pull the first scripture. The first scripture is from Deuteronomy chapter 28, and we will take verse 15, Baba Kusha. Deuteronomy 28 and 15, right? So we're going to understand a little bit what happened to the black man, right, and why the black man ended up in this position today. And a lot of our leaders has failed us, right, because they was unable to tell us why the blacks, the Hispanics, and the Native Indians seem to be struggling in society. Something seems to be hampering them, even though you go and do your PhD, you do your degrees, understand, you have a good job. When you watch the majority of the nation, everybody's still suffering. And you know, once your nation suffering, you suffering, because you have no military might, no economic might, no ability to bargain or trade on a world scale, right? You are just one man who have a little bit of money, right? If you do happen to make it, right? So give me the Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 15, Baba Kisha.
The book of Deuteronomy 28 and verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee.
Right. So in the book of Deuteronomy, right, way back in the book of Moses, right, the children of Israel made a covenant to the Most High Power, the Most High God, right, and the covenant we made with him is that we would keep all his laws, his statutes, and commandments, all the things he commanded us to do, and to keep how we should live, right? What we should eat, what we shouldn't eat, right? How we should treat one another. We made a promise to keep all these righteous laws that the Most High Power set for us, right? But it had also had a clause to it, and the clause is that if we did not keep it, these curses would come upon us, right? We would fall into the consequences that we see in today, right? And what a lot of our religious leaders and the people we tend to follow in authority of the world is that what they don't know is that these curses is still in effect today, right? The black man, the Hispanic man, and the Native Indian man are under these curses. And the reason why the black, Hispanic, and Native Indian man are under these curses is because they are the 12 lost tribes of the nation of Israel. We are the Israelites of the Bible, right? And a lot of people do not know that we are the Israelites of the Bible. And if we do hear it, right, we do really consider it. We do take time to check it out and investigate if this is true or not, right? But whether you believe it is true or not, the black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man is already in the bottom of society, and the only way for us to come back out is to come back in alignment and in obedience to the laws that the Most High set upon the face of the earth under Christ, right? And the only way you could do that is to come in under commanding GEN.YAHANNA, because the I.S.U.P.K under commanding GEN.YAHANNA is the only place, right, that teaches the black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man to come back into alignment with Christ and to the Most High, to come back in obedience to the laws, the statutes, and the commandments, to start to be born again, to be a righteous man on the face of the earth, right? So with that being said, and we now understand that, you get a brief understanding of why the black man in this stage in society, right? The other nations now knowing, right? Knowing the history of Israel and knowing the history of the black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man, knowing this history that we under the curses of a power mightier than us, and ones that could keep us in against this power, not obeying this power, they know that they will always be on top. And this is history that they know. So as nations, they, as the Psalm say, they become confederate against us, right? And because at that now, the nations now have been taken their place skillfully around the black man, the Hispanic man, and the Native Indian man, and seizing power, so that the black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man will always remain in the bottom of society, right? And because we so focus in the world of just going to work, paying the bills, seeing about the trend, you don't have time to understand how these different nations setting up the economic power in different ways and different strategies in the different countries in the world, right? And one of these countries here in Trinidad, right? We have many different nations here in Trinidad, and we're just going to touch on one of them tonight, which is the Chinese, right? And we're going to touch on the Chinese to show you how the Chinese has slipped in Trinidad and how they have easily worked their way into a position of power until some of the other nations even taking note of it, understand, because they're beginning to hold dominance right here locally in Trinidad, right? So with that being said, all right, we'll play a short clip so we will understand what's really happening in Trinidad, right? So this is a old clip, not too old, right? This is a clip from 2008, right? And we will play it and we will understand what is happening here in Trinidad with these Chinese, right? Right, and the title you'll see Moab, right? On the title of this class you will see the Moabites, right, are the Chinese, the biblical name for the Chinese in the Bible, right? And these things the Christian pastor would not know, right? And so he cannot explain these things to you. So that's why you had to remove yourself from the Christian church and come into the I.S.U.P.K under command in GEN.YAHANNA, where we study this Bible and apply all the things written in this Bible, right? We live this Bible, right?
Visiting senior Communist Party official He Guoqiang says China is ready to raise its relations with Trinidad and Tobago to a new level.
Right, so this was a video from 2008, right? And I think the then president in the Trinidad and Tobago in the video here was Maxwell Richards, right? Now the Chinese interaction with Trinidad was way earlier than that, and we will go back as we continue going on in the class. But we will start here, all right? Which is a more recent one to show you how the Chinese make the promise, but they already fulfill the promise because they come to take real stake in Trinidad and Tobago.
For details.
He Guoqiang, a member of the Political Bureau Standing Committee of the CPC Central Committee, met with Trinidad and Tobago's President George Richards Wednesday in the country's capital city, Port of Spain. He Guoqiang says the Chinese government attaches great importance to its relations with Trinidad and Tobago, and China will enhance high-level contacts, political trust, and economic and trade cooperation. He noted that since China and Trinidad and Tobago set up diplomatic ties 34 years ago, their bilateral relations have developed steadily. He added Trinidad and Tobago has become one of China's most important trading partners in the Caribbean region. He also expressed his appreciation for its government's adherence to the One China policy. He Guoqiang says the Chinese government will work with the government of Trinidad and Tobago to promote the overall development of friendly relations and cooperation between China and Caribbean countries. For his part, Richard spoke highly of the contributions the Chinese people have made to China's economic development and social progress. He said his country hopes to further strengthen cooperation with China in various fields and to continue to push forward bilateral ties. They also discussed the current world energy situation and the measures to address the issue. He Guoqiang arrived in the country after a goodwill visit to Cuba. Trinidad and Tobago is the second leg of his four-country tour that will also take him to Brazil and Angola. Sungin, CCTV.
Right. So this was a Chinese diplomat from the Chinese delegation coming into Trinidad. All right. to visit Trinidad to make the ties between Trinidad and Tobago stronger. All right, because in earlier times, as we will go back to read, right, China was here in Trinidad, but they had not really set a solid ground and a solid base in Trinidad, right? But during that time in 2000, coming up in the 2000s, is when they begin to get the advantage to set up a strong base in Trinidad and Tobago, right? So the Senate delegation now to start the talks to make the agreement, right? So you go play the short clip here now, right?
Hello.
All right, so this is a short clip. All right, if you watch the bottom of the clip, it say historian Wally Look Lai joins Mariel to talk about the history of the Chinese in Trinidad and Tobago. All right, so this is a Chinese historian, right, here in Trinidad and Tobago, and this journalist go on to interview this man about to get a little history about the Chinese in Trinidad, right?
So I'm Marielle Brown and this is Sankush, a delicious melee of Caribbean people, food, and craft. I'm here on Charlotte Street, which is where you'll find one of the largest proliferations of Chinese anywhere in Trinidad. And that's because after the period of indentureship, the Chinese literally set up shop in areas like this. So we'll be learning a lot more about that and making some fantastic Chinese food in this episode. So come and join me.
All right. So in the beginning, what she's trying to explain is that after indentureship labor, right, because it was slavery, right, with us enslaved blacks, Hispanics, and Native Indians, and then when they couldn't hold the slave labor anymore, they started to bring indentured labor from India, right? And after the indentured labor now is when the Chinese get a more stronger foothold to come and get their chance now to enter into Trinidad, right?
2006 will mark 200 years since the Chinese first arrived in Trinidad.
Right. So the year 2006 marked the Chinese being 200 years in Trinidad and Tobago, right? And that only goes to show that how the Chinese people could look back, right, at their records and tell all where their people went and know when they went, right? So their records intact, right?
The migration of 1806 was a colonial experiment in settlement, which was almost an entire failure. The idea behind it was that the Chinese settlers would be a trading bridge between the East and Latin America. All of the 200 or so men that arrived were given free passage to return to China should they not like Trinidad.
Right. So they say that the first attempt to come to Trinidad, they make an experiment, and the experiment failed. Right. Further along, we go investigate why the experiment failed. But they say now the experiment failed, and when the experiment failed, they take them back. Right. They didn't leave them in Trinidad.
It goes, mostly they didn't. So by the 1810s, there were barely more than 24 of that original group left. It was the first organized settlement of Chinese in the Americas. The second group of Chinese came to Trinidad after the abolition of slavery as indentured laborers.
Right. So let's say the second group come, but the second group come as indentured laborers, just like how the Indians come as indentured laborers, they come as indentured laborers, which means when I say indentured labor, which means they sign a contract to come in. Nobody then kidnap them, right? And kidnap the family like the black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man to force them over here. Them decide to sign a contract to come into Trinidad, right? As workers. So meaning that they will get paid, right?
Chinese peasants in Guangdong and Fujian provinces would have seized the opportunity to flee China during the turbulent years of the Taiping Rebellion.
Right. So because of the Taiping Rebellion, them now get see opportunity to bust out from China and get work for the family here in Trinidad. Come to Trinidad, right? Because them had their own war going on in China, right?
And Wally Look-Like explains.
Right? So this is one of the Chinese historian explaining how they get here to Trinidad, right? And what was offered.
Fujian, which are in South China, Southeast China, were the places which traditionally have been most accustomed to the arrival of foreign traders, going as far back as the Arabs and the Indians and so on. While the imperial court up in the north was concerned with its own affairs, they tried to leave the business of overseas trade to the people who were furthest away from them. So these two provinces, as a result, developed a very vigorous overseas trading connection, plus a people and a population who were not afraid of foreigners, so to speak, or you could say less afraid than the northerners. Their options were not just internal migration, which is how your average northerner would have oriented themselves, but they had external options.
About 3,000 Chinese came to Trinidad during the 1840s, 50s, and 60s.
Right? So they'll say between the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, 3,000 Chinese take the chance to come to Trinidad, right? Signing because the goal is to make that money that they hear about in Trinidad and escape the war back in China, right?
To work in sugar as indentured laborers.
They were offered 5 years. They were offered free passage.
Right? So he's saying on the Chinese contract, right? The Chinese contract, they offer them 5 years work in Trinidad, right? And they offer them free passage, so they didn't have to pay to come in, right? So it's like somebody hiring a work to go out, right? And they give 5 years work and your passage pay. So you understand about that, right?
They were offered a certain wage.
Right? So it means they offer them a wage.
Somewhere in the region of $4 to $6 a month.
Right. So they was getting $4 to $6 a month. Right? Back then, that was big money because back then, at the time, somebody in the laborers who was working here, they was paying them 25 cents. Understand? Or somebody slaves who went back to the plantation after slavery, that was getting 25 cents, and them was getting $5 to $6. So them by the time them get a 5 years wage, them rich, right?
They were offered.
I remember that was British money because it was under British colony rule, right?
Some of the Chinese were offered free food. Some of them,
right?
Like the Indians, were not.
Right.
But
so you see now, they get 5 years work. They pay the passage for them to come to Trinidad for free. They was getting $5 to $6, like pounds, right, in Trinidad, right, to work here. Plus they was giving them free food, right? And them who didn't want no free food, right? He said them was like just like how the East Indian was, right? And this is what they get instead of the free food, right?
Who were often offered a plot of land.
Right? So if you don't want to take the 5 years of them mining you and getting free food, they're giving you a plot of land. Right here in Trinidad, and it's yours. With your deed, everything. Right? And that is where the Chinese people were offered
because they were missionaries
to come to Trinidad. Right?
Intermediaries in the thing. They wanted to encourage family migration.
Right? And he said they wanted to encourage family migration. The only reason they go away to bring your families to settle. You understand? Because the Chinese now had a bigger vision. Them vision was just not Chinese living in China. They started to go outside the borders now. They want people to be all over the world. And Trinidad was one of that destination, right?
To attract women to come with some of the men folk. Some people took advantage of this, and this is how the women came along.
Right?
However, unlike East Indian
so he say now to encourage the men to come, right? The advertiser to the women, you understand? So you see what happening? The influence women, and then the women go say, "Let me go now," you understand? Because they know once they convince the woman, the man go follow, because that's how society is now, right?
Indentured laborers who were guaranteed in their contracts a return passage to India if they so desired,
right?
Chinese indentures were not given the return passage clause.
Right. So they pay for them to go free. But then they realize now it's too expensive to pay for them to come back to. Right? But the Indians, the state, had it both ways. They pay for them to go free and pay for them to come back. Right? So the Indians benefit just as much as the Chinese, right? While the slaves now working for 25 cents and some of them free, nothing. Right? They're just getting food to eat, right?
And ultimately, this is why the whole system started to unravel, since including the clause made Chinese labor too expensive. By the end of the 1860s, new Chinese indentureship had essentially petered out. Chinese migration to Trinidad continues even up to today.
Right? And let's see now, Chinese migration still continue up to today, as we know, right? So within the two clips, which are two recent clips, they're showing you now, right? From back then, when they tried the first time, it failed, right? Because the Chinese didn't want to stay, right? So now we will go in an article and find out why they did not want to stay in Trinidad, right? There are reasons for them not wanting to stay in Trinidad, and we go find out.
Right.
Right, so this is an article from the National Library, right, in Trinidad and Tobago. This is NALES, right? This is off the library website, right? And that to show how the Chinese information properly documented in Trinidad, and the Black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man catching the tail to find his history. And I stand and looking all about, right? Them have all the history properly documented. And I stand with the just go at the tip of the finger. They just go on a laptop and look back and see all the history. And understand? So their library properly documented in the Trinidad and Tobago. This is the National Library. These are a government owned library, right? And this we're saying here, right? It's saying Chinese arrival, right? Chinese immigration to Trinidad occurred in 4 waves, right? So 4 different times is when Chinese come across in a big way, right? The first wave of Chinese immigrants arrived in Trinidad on the 12th October 1806, right? So in 1806 is when the first set of Chinese come in Trinidad, right? On the ship 42, right? And I can even tell you what ship they come on. First, they take meticulous documents, understand? Of their journey to the islands in the Caribbean, right? Of the 200 passengers to set sail, 192 arrived, right? So out of the 200, 192 come to Trinidad. They came not from mainland China, but from Mako, right? Penang and Canton, right? So they leave China, go into this place, and then now they ship out from there to come to Trinidad, right? The first attempt at Chinese migration was an experiment intended to set up a settlement of peasant farmers and laborers, right? So the first attempt was for Chinese people to become farmers, right? And laborers locally here in Trinidad, right? So they'll make that first attempt. The objective of the experiment were to populate the new acquired British colony Trinidad, and more importantly, to find a new labor source for the replacement of African slaves who would no longer be available once slavery and the slave trade were abolished, right? So they realized the slave trade was coming to an end, and they realized most likely the slaves will not stay because that was forced labor. That was there against the will. Right. So they realized if we end the slave trade, the slaves not going to stay on the plantation, so they had us again new labor, right? And that is where they look towards the East Indians and in this case the Chinese, right? So they're looking for a new labor source to replace slavery, right? It was felt that the Chinese immigrants could work on the sugar estates, right? So they come up with the idea that they could hire Chinese, since the Chinese in their own war in their own civil war in China, they could hire the Chinese to come now and work on the sugar estates instead of the Negroes, right? Upon arrival, the majority of the immigrants were sent to the sugar plantation, right? So upon arrival now, they take the Chinese now and put them on the sugar plantation where the slaves used to work, right? Because they're trying to replace the labor force. The rest were sent to Kokorit, where they lived as a community, right, of artisans and peasant farmers, right? So some, right, go straight to the plantation, right, according to the contract, and others now who they will call them freemen, will go to to be artisans, like artists and farmers, right? So them go down in Kokorit to form a Chinese community to live, right? Living conditions were awful. Very few of the immigrants stayed on the estates for long, right? So the city living conditions, right, on the estates was awful, and the Chinese did not want to stay, right? And this was the reason why the first experiment with bringing Chinese in Trinidad failed. Because when they send them on the plantation, they realized the conditions the Negroes was working on that, them couldn't work on that under that. They realized it was too too dilapidated and in such a state that them couldn't make on that condition, and they didn't want to stay. And imagine, them didn't want to stay in that condition, and them was getting paid. And we was not getting paid, and people forcing we to stay in that condition. And I'd like to tell how low of a state the Black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man had us to enjoy slavery. And a very terrible state. Understand? And here you see that the Chinese choose, the first time that when they come on the plantation, they realize, nah, we can't make that, them choose to go back home. Understand? First, it was dilapidated, right? Many of those who decided, right, to stay, right? So some of them who decided to stay now in Trinidad became butchers, shopkeepers, and market gardeners. The rest returned to China under fortitude. Understand? So some who decided to stay, they turned butchers, carpenters, shopkeepers, and gardeners, right? And the rest say them can't make that, they're going back home, right? So the accused. So them pick up themselves and they say, boy, we going back home. We can't make this condition. We want to pay, they break the contract, we going back home, right? Of the 192 immigrants, only 23 opted to stay in Trinidad. So first, the conditions was bad, I understand, and was low on these sugar estates, and they couldn't understand how the Black and the Hispanic man was living under them conditions. First, it was bad. 192 of them come, and 23, right, opted to stay, and the rest choose to go back. Understand? Because them couldn't make it. Understand? So that's like 95% of them decide of going back. All right. The experiment was considered a failure and was never repeated. Understand? So they never attempt that experiment again because they realized the Chinese did not want to live under the conditions that they had these slaves working on the plantation for hundreds of years, right? So it was very, very dilapidated, right? The second wave, right, of Chinese immigration took place after the abolition of slavery. Most immigrants came from southern Guangdong, from the southern Guangdong province, an area comprising of Macau, Hong Kong, and Canton. The immigrants arrived in Trinidad as indentured laborers between 1853 and 1866, right? So between 1853 and 1866, right, the Chinese signed new contracts again, right, with these British colonies to come back into Trinidad, but this time they're coming as indentured laborers, right? Then coming as then making no experiment, right? They're coming, they're signing a contract and they're coming to Trinidad to work, right? It was normal for the Chinese to migrate in large numbers to countries in Southeast Asia, All right, so it is a normal thing to see Chinese migrating, but around Southeast Asia, right? But the period 1853 to 1866 saw them migrating on a global scale to countries such as Australia, Canada, the United States, and the Caribbean, right? So between 1853 and 1856, the Chinese started to go to other countries in the world, right? They started to migrate to other countries in the world to look for work, and some was to go and settle, right? To settle down. In Trinidad, a small portion of this vast movement, right? Slovakia in Trinidad received a small portion of this vast movement. Those who came here included both indentured laborers and free Chinese who migrated voluntarily.
Right.
Right? So some come for work and others volunteer. You understand? Them they decide they want to move to another country. So them volunteer to come, right? And because hearing about the conditions in Trinidad and the war that's going on over in China, right? They take it upon themselves that they're coming down to Trinidad, right? The indentured laborers were assigned to work on estates, right? So they put them back on estates this time again, and their terms and conditions of employment were the same as those given to the Indian indentured laborers, right? So this time they get them more favorable terms, right? Just as how the historian was explaining before, right? That was given free travel, right? Given better wages. They were given food allowance, right? And those who didn't want the food allowance were given land here in Trinidad instead. And they had the option, if they did not want to stay in Trinidad, that they could go back, right? They could go back to China, right? Right. So the condition was very much in their favor, all right. The indentured laborers were assigned to work on the estates, and their terms and conditions of employment were the same as those given to the East Indians. So the East Indians get the same staff just as the Chinese, right? Right? So they had favorable conditions when coming to Trinidad as well. Nobody didn't kidnap them, right? Nobody didn't steal the culture. Nobody didn't kill the parents or bash the babies against tree, right? Or force them to into Christianity. Nobody didn't do them that. Them sign a contract to come to work in Trinidad to get paid, right? And to get proper living conditions in Trinidad, right? The Chinese indentureship program came to an end in 1866 because the Chinese government insisted on a free return passage for the laborers. So the Chinese government now wanted to negotiate a free passage back to China, right? Instead of the laborers having to pay to come back, they wanted the British to pay for the laborers to go back to China, just as how they paid for the East Indians to go back to India, whoever wanted to go back, right? Right? The British government, which had organized the indentureship program, felt that was too costly and ended the program. So then the British realized that they pay for them to come, pay for them to go back, get them food, you pay them the best wage, right? And you're giving them land. The British realized that Chinese labor too expensive. Understand? And the reason why the Chinese get these favorable conditions is because they were together as a nation. Understand? They had their leaders on behalf of them negotiating this trip for Chinese people to come and work in a British colony called Trinidad in the Caribbean, right? So the program came to an end because the British realized the labor too expensive, right? So after that time passed, a third wave of Chinese, right, decide to migrate into Trinidad again, right? And at this time period, when they decided to migrate into Trinidad was in the year 1911, right? And that was a direct result of the Chinese Revolution. Between the 1920s and the 1940s, immigration increased significantly, right? These new immigrants comprised of families and friends of earlier migrants. So the earlier people who came and who decided to stay in Trinidad now, their family and their friends begin to come in the third wave, right? Because they realize the family and friends making it in Trinidad and they have a life and they realize the living conditions good. Now their families started to leave China to come and meet them here in Trinidad in the 1920s to the 1940s, right? These new immigrants comprise of families and friends of earlier immigrants. They did not work on the estates, right? So the new families and friends now, right? Them and working on the estate, understand? Because that is where their family used to work before. So they get the upgrade, right? Them now, not working on the estates, but came as merchant, peddlers, traders, and shopkeepers. Understand? So they come with the motive to open business and to trade. Understand? So them did not come to work as how the first counterparts came. Understand? They came to set up business in Trinidad. All right, and this is what this is how the Chinese came across. They didn't come empty-handed. They come equipped to set up shop one time as they reach, right?
Right.
In addition to the immigrants from China, there were also immigrants from other parts of the Caribbean region, mainly Guyana. These were Chinese who had originally served their indentureship on the mainland. All right, so other Chinese now who did not come to Trinidad but went to different Caribbean islands, them now decide when their indentureship contract done, some of them decide now that they're leaving and coming to Trinidad. So the Chinese that went to Guyana to serve their indentureship decide now that they're coming to Trinidad, right? Once their period of indentureship was finished, they migrated to Trinidad to seek better opportunities because they find the conditions in Trinidad was better for them to set up shop, and it already had other Chinese who was there before, right? So it would be easy for them. They will have people of their nation living among them, right? Easy for them to form a community. All right, and then now migration ceased completely during the period of the Chinese Revolution. However, during the 1970s, so we move from 1911 straight up to the 1940s, now we're in the 1970s, right? During the late 1970s, when China started opening up to the outside world, right? So they started back to open up after the Chinese Revolution, migration resumed once more. And this was the fourth wave. So this is the fourth wave of Chinese coming into Trinidad, right? And continues on a small scale even up to today. You understand? Right. So they had four major waves of Chinese coming in, right? And when they started to work on the estates the first time, right? The conditions wasn't good, they went back. And then they negotiate new contracts to get better living conditions to come and work on the estates. And when they do come back, the conditions was so favorable that it caused a third wave, bringing the family and friends to come and live in Trinidad because the conditions became better and more favorable, and the British colony gave them land to settle down right here in Trinidad. While the Black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man who was in slavery, right, for hundreds of years, when they left, when the plantations, when slavery was abolished on the plantation, they had nothing to go back to. You understand? They had no land, nothing, right, to function. And these people were getting paid and getting land and still had the option to go back to their homeland or to the motherland. All right? Right, and then they have here, right, a list of vessels arriving in Trinidad with Chinese immigrants, right? And again, when you look at the list, right, the list could tell you the name of each ship that brings Chinese people straight down into Trinidad, right? So you have the Fortitude, you have the Australia, because they used to carry Chinese to Australia as well, right? You have the Claridon, the Lady Flora, right? The Maggie Miller, right? Wanata, the Montrose, the Paria, the Tobruk, and the Red Riding Hood. You understand? All these were ships and vessels that brought Chinese people, right? Straight down from, and that the years also, and the date they came, right? The first set of Chinese came on the 12th October 1806. Imagine, imagine that, right? Imagine that the exact date when the first set of Chinese came to Trinidad. You understand? And that to show you how the Chinese still have their records in intact, pretty much intact, right? So that the fortitude coming in 1806, that was the first of the Chinese, and then you have all through 1853, 1862, 1865. All these days were when ships came, and the last major migration before the things open up today, like how we have people moving from place to place today, right? The last major migration of Chinese to the island of Trinidad was the 24th of February 1866. At that time they recorded, right? And they came to Trinidad to set up shop, right, and to do business in Trinidad. They did not come to be employees. Understand? They came to build their nation right here in Trinidad, right? And also to have the distribution of Chinese in the community of Trinidad and Tobago in the years 1946 to 1990, right? And they even have graphs, right, with with um with documenting where the Chinese settled in the different parts of Trinidad, right? And and if you look at the graph, I don't know if you could pick it up on the screen, all right? But I will just read it out, right? It's showing you that the settled in St. George, Caroni, Victoria, St. Patrick's, St. Andrews, Tobago, and even in central Trinidad, a place called Nariva, right? So that they have meticulous records of every place these Chinese, right, settled in Trinidad, right? We have our next graph here. This graph saying the distribution of the Chinese community by boroughs, right? From 1946 to 1990, right? And the two major boroughs in Trinidad is the borough of Arima and the borough of Point Fortin, right? And when you look at it, the borough of Arima had taken the most of the Chinese, the borough of Point Fortin, the red ones, right? They also had Chinese settling in the Southland in Trinidad as well, right? In the borough of Point Fortin. All right, we have our next graph. This graph showing the distribution of Chinese by cities, right? By different cities in Trinidad and Tobago, right? In the same year, 1946 to 1990, all right? And they have Trinidad have two major cities, right? Which is Port of Spain and San Fernando, all right? And the the blue looking ones is where the Chinese settle in Port of Spain, and the green looking ones is where the Chinese settle in San Fernando, right? So they take meticulous records to have this nation um, to know exactly all where their people settle and what year they were settling in these areas, right? And then you have the distribution of Chinese community by a total of males and females. So now they're checking them by male and female, right? You had as much as 4,500 in the year 1960, right? 4,500 males. And in that same year, it had 3,500 females in that same year, right? And they have it all through the years where it rise and it fall with the different Chinese and how they settle as male and female, you understand? So they take proper records. And when you look at the black man history or the Hispanic man history or the Native Indian man history, we struggling, you understand, to find our history. You understand? We're looking all about and all different libraries, all kind of thing mixed up together and we're struggling. But here in I.S.U.P.K under command of GEN.YAHANNA, we will tell you the black, the Native Indian, and the Hispanic man's history. Right? Our history is this Bible here. The black man history, the Hispanic man history, and the Native Indian man's history is in the Bible. We are the lost 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. We are the Israelites of the Bible. Right? That is the black man's history, right? right? So all these graphs that they have set up, right, showing proper records of how they knew exactly where their people went, where they settled, and how many of them were migrating to these countries, right? So they just didn't go out to these countries and they didn't know where the people was. Right? Understand? They took proper record, right? We have the total distribution of Chinese community in the 1946 to 1990, and this is how the total distributions during the years that they came to Trinidad. And I started in 1946, it had just under 6,000, right? The highest year was in 1960, it had almost 9,000 Chinese coming to Trinidad. And then by the year 1990, it fell back, but people were still coming. Over 5,000 people came, right, to Trinidad. So a lot of Chinese over the years came into Trinidad and settled, right? But when they came into Trinidad and settled, they did not come as employees or workers after that indentureship. They came as business people and traders, you understand? So immediately they were off the ground running, whilst the black, the Hispanic man and Native Indian man was still fighting on the plantation. And understand? He's still struggling and fighting a battle to get himself off the plantation and from under these white slave masters, right? And the Chinese was already off the ground running, right? Them looking to set up business, right? So then we will move across, we get a little bit about the economic life, right? How the Chinese, how the fare in Trinidad, how they used to live in Trinidad, right? And it's saying here, once the period of indentureship was finished, right? So once the indentureship of the Chinese was finished, the Chinese left the estate. Right, so after the indentureship finished, they leave the estate. A few of them return to China. So some choose to go back home in China. But most of them, right, because the conditions become more favorable, but most of them opted to remain in Trinidad. They became, right, these were the Chinese became in Trinidad. They became shopkeepers, farmers, restaurant owners, and small traders. Many of them set up shop in rural villages, competing with the already established Portuguese shopkeepers, right? So already in Trinidad, even the Portuguese, right, was already set up doing business in Trinidad, and the Chinese now enter into competition with the Portuguese, right? The Portuguese is just another form of the white man, right? Another nation, another tribe of the white man, right? These Chinese were gradually accepted in their local community and became an indispensable part of the village, right? So so they started become integrated in the village because now they're providing services with their business that the community need. So the community now start to accept them in the different villages that they were in Trinidad, right? The male Chinese proprietor was called Chin, and his wife was called Mary, regardless of what their real names were, right? And right, they gonna make you know, right, that they enter a black man country. You understand? Because a black man not fighting to pronounce a Chinese name. And understand? Right. He not fighting to pronounce Young Ping Wang. You understand? So back then, you see a Chinese man, his name was Chin. And you see how his wife they married. That I really so called the shopkeeper. Chin and Mary. That is it. They make it simple. You understand? And they now start to integrate themselves into these rural villages in Trinidad, right?
Right.
Often, customers who were short on cash were allowed to take their groceries on credit. So the Chinese now see opportunity, right? They realize the black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man, we can't make the buy food. We living in the poorest of conditions. We have nothing, right? We have no land of our own, right? We struggling to get work. Some of we had us to go back on the plantation to get work, right? So because we're struggling, the Chinese now see opportunity and to compete, because remember they're competing with these Portuguese settlers who already set up shop. So to compete with them now, they started give grocery on credit, right? Meaning they'll get the grocery and they'll pay later, right? And that is where the term trust, they're going in the parlance trust, or going in shop and trust, that's where that term come from, all right? This system was called trusting, right? The shopkeeper would record goods taken and their prices in a copybook. Remember them days when they used to write down where you're taking a copybook and they had to come and pay for it later? Chinese, right? And the customer would then pay off his debt in installments, right? So we were so poor, right? The Black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man was so poor in Trinidad that we couldn't afford to buy food. So we go in these Chinese shops when they set it up, and then now we would trust the goods, right? Meaning that they would take the goods on credit, and then they will pay back this debt now in installments, right? To get to pay it off. And the Chinese use that as opportunity, right? The Chinese shopkeeper would deduct each payment from the principal owed until the debt was fully paid off, right? Each transaction was recorded in a copybook, right? Where we just call a copybook in Trinidad is like a small book, a small notepad, right? What a soft cover book, right? Where you would use to take notes, right? So they would write down all who was owing them, all right? And that way they're going to remember how much debt each person had. And the majority of people who would trust these goods would be Black, Hispanic, and Native Indian people, because we was the poorest in society, right? We couldn't even afford to buy food, so we had to trust the food, right? We had to take an advance on food and then pay them later, right? So the Chinese using this the advantage, right? The Chinese shopkeeper would deduct each payment from the principal owed until the debt was fully paid off. Each transaction was recorded in a copybook. It must be noted that there was no fixed amount on the installment, right? So they didn't give you an exact amount that they had to pay the installment. You paying wherever you could pay, right? No interest charge, so there wasn't charging interest, and no specific time period in which to repay the debt. So they're forcing you to pay the debt by next week, right? And this is how they was able to make Chinese business boom, right? Because if I'm going by the Portuguese man or the East Indian man in his shop and I had to pay for the goods up front, right? And I have somewhere else to give me the goods in advance and I pay them at a later date and they're not holding me to a specific installment, then now the Chinese business become more favorable because people realize now that it's better go by the Chinese man because I get trust rather than I go by any other nation to get these goods. And understand? So the Chinese shops and enterprises now begin to become more popular over the rest. And that is how the Chinese now really enter into the business market. Understand? Because now the customers start to run to them because they could actually get the goods and pay at a later date, right? In fact, very often the customer would pay off his debt and take a new set of groceries on trust on the same day. Understand? So you come and pay off the debt you had for last week, and then you say, all right, I will take this week. You understand? So you just constantly living in a deficit. You understand where I'm coming from? Right? So you pay off last week full and you take a new set, and now you had to pay that, you had to find the money now to pay them for that next week. Right. You understand? And that's how the Chinese get the engine moving, because and the Chinese didn't care. You understand? Because remember, they're already able to support the family, and then they know that the goods that they have not staying on the shelf. You understand? So why is the Portuguese man, right, and the East Indian man fighting to get the goods off his shelf? Their goods going, they're giving you the goods in advance. So then now you owe me. And understand? So you're always in debt to the Chinese, right? Just as the prophecy say, we will go to the nations for everything. So we started even going to the nations for the very food, and look how long this was in the way back in the 1800s, right? And then into the early 1900s, right? That's how long this is going on, right? Right. On the era of the Chinese shopkeeper, it was but a memory in the 21st century, right? So in the 21st century, things changed because now they lost the foothold that they was having on the market, because as I say, white supremacy kick in. And understand? So as the years started come up now, all them things like Atlantic LNG, all them industries started come on, the white man started coming heavy, right? Oil in Trinidad, the British started come down heavy in Trinidad. You understand? So now they started lost the foothold. So that shopkeeper model now, it's forcing them to change out of that model, because that was a model that was settling inside a village, right? And would depend on the Black, Hispanic, and Native Indian communities to support that business model, right? So the era of the Chinese shopkeeper is but a memory of the 21st century. The small shop was given way to the large supermarkets owned and operated. So now they realized they had to move from small shops and they started to open supermarkets, right? Bigger and more massive areas where people could come and shop and buy items, right? So they started to own and operate supermarket chains, right? Not by an individual, but by a conglomerate. So then now a conglomerate is they start to team up. So instead of Pyongyang having one parlor in one area and Wingpang having a parlor in the next area, they decide to team up and dominate the industry to try now to open big and large supermarkets to control and have more dominance in the area, right? So the small shop was given way to the large supermarket owned and operated not by an individual but by a conglomerate. The credit and debit cards have replaced the need for trusting from the Chinese shopkeeper, right? So white supremacy kick in, the white man come with the debit card and the credit card, right? So now the white man giving you credit to go and buy now from these supermarkets. And so now you're in debt, right? To all these white-owned corporations, right? So the white man find a way to transfer the black man debt so that the black man owing the white man now. So white supremacy kick in, right? And the Chinese now business being still supported by you, but the debt will be owed to these bank and different corporations that they will take out their credit card and debit cards from, right?
Right.
So many shopkeepers themselves have either migrated or gone into new business. So it forced the Chinese now. That's why I remember that whole area, like even locally, don't like all in Vans River had them Chinese shop and thing. Now plenty of them closed down because the trust in era done. Right? Everybody started to operate through the banks, and it caused some of them to migrate. Go ahead, Officer Bayer.
Yeah, even the there are a lot of Chinese shops, something in Library, that started to come back. But one of them from the era when they leave, that it still is carry the same name, Boys Hardware.
Yeah.
From he get from a Chinese.
Yeah.
Chinese went back.
Yeah, they're keeping the name, they're keeping that history alive. Yeah, I feel it. And that's where I'm coming from. All right. So during this period, you know, they migrate, right? And we see now, and some decide to leave when they realize there's too much pressure, and some decide to open a new type of business, right? So the model was a shop, the make supermarket. When the white man come and put pressure on them in the supermarket by bringing debit card and them kind of thing now. So now black people don't owe the Chinese again, we owe the white man. And so they started remodel themselves and started make new businesses. That's how we started getting like Chinese restaurants and these and some of them still keep the supermarket model. Some of them go into cloth, and so they're finding new ways to operate the businesses, right? In the years, Chinese developed a reputation for being thrifty and hardworking. Many of them became wealthy and were able to branch out in new fields, right? Because, of course, after years, our black people keep trusting from you, you will become wealthy. You understand where I'm coming from? Because you're constantly having them in debt to you. You understand? The table now compares the occupations of the Chinese between 1806 and the present, right? So remember, when they first started, right, they come as indented laborers. So they sign a contract to come, and they decide to come as indented laborers. Some choose to go back, and the majority choose to stay because the condition was better than the first time they come, right? And during that time now, when they settled in Trinidad, this is what happened, right? These are the occupations Chinese people was holding, right? So Chinese people from 1806, they was into trading, fishing, carpentry. Some of them was butchers, gardeners, right? Some was laborers, merchandising, farming, right? So that was the first section in 1806. But what the jobs they had? Now what the jobs they jumped to now, right? the present day occupations they have: manufacturing, merchandising, banking, business, farming, politics, librarianship, because they are historians, right? Art and design, medicine and hospitality, right? And before, they were just a mere shopkeeper. You understand? So the keep now, because they had the advantage to start off in business, and the black people owe them so much debt in the past. We thinking, well, all right, well, the Chinese could make, so he closed down his shop. Yeah, he closed down his shop, but he opened something bigger. But you don't know that that business is he owned, because now it in Mark Pingyang supermarket. You understand? Because some of them come government so big and they're naming it English names. So we don't know it's Chinese people owning these business, right? So that is strategy they're using, right? Then I go down to say some of the Chinese immigrants became involved in pig farming, right? I saw how far they're going. They begin to come pig farmers in Trinidad. This is Trinidad history, right? Today, they also involved in manufacture of products derived from this activity. For example, Mac Foods Limited. We know Mac Foods today. I have business that around today, present day 2020, right? Mac Foods Limited manufactures pork products such as ham, bacon, and sausage. Now we know the time for ham, right? When the poor people in the world is around Christmas time. So when they go and buy pork, which is unlawful, right? Because the Most High say we're not supposed to eat pork, but the people in the world, right, going to buy pork for Christmas. You know what the money going to? The money going to the Chinese. And that's where I'm from. That is why the I.S.U.P.K under command GEN.YAHANNA tell you come out at Christmas, come out at these pagan holidays, because them set up these things. Now that is a white man holiday, but the Chinese put itself in place to receive he portion of that money. That is to show how they just think. And I understand them just think in advance. They're thinking to set up industries to see how they could corner the black man, because he in the bottom of society. And we thinking now that I choose to buy, not you choose to buy this, because why they set up every corner. You want clothes? Go to this man, go to Nike. You understand where I'm coming from? You want ham? You're going to Mac Food, they're going to the Chinese. You understand? You want wood in the hardware to build your house, they go into the East Indians. That's how they set it up. So black people running between all these nations. They want cloth, they go into Abood. You understand? They want security, Abood. They go into the Syrians and all the Trinidad whites. Right? We set up shop in Trinidad. And this is how they're controlling and holding economic power in Trinidad. So one way the Chinese fit themselves to try to hold some power is by selling pork. Understand? And imagine if black people would stop eating pork in Trinidad, a whole industry might shut down. Because it was we who supporting that business. The majority of people who supporting Mac Food in Trinidad is blacks, Hispanics, and Native Indians. So if we would follow that one law in the scripture, you understand? And we could shut down a whole industry by supporting one law. You understand? And that's why the I.S.U.P.K under command GEN.YAHANNA important. You understand? So anyway, so the Chinese became involved in pig farming today. They are also involved in the manufacture of products derived from this activity, right? So all the other products, they're only selling the pig meat, they're breaking it down into meat to make sausage and all these different things, right? For example, Mac Foods manufactures pork products such as ham, bacon, and sausage. They're breaking it down, right? While Erin Farm continues in pig farming as well as the manufacture of pork products. Erin Farm is down here. Drive down this main road straight down, you go bounce up Erin Farm, right? Now look at this. They have a reason why they mention Mac Food and why they mention Erin Farm, right? And we're going to get it, right? Why they would mention these two businesses? This is Erin Farm. Erin Farm they sell pork meat because they're rearing pigs on the farm, and then now they're shipping the pork meat to Mac Foods, so that Mac Foods will break it down to make ham and sausage and bacon as we just read, right? But this is the important thing in this article, and this is where these nations just corner we, right? So this is Erin Farm now telling you about their business, right? They say quality processed meat since 1992. So I want to start the business, right? And they say about us. So they're telling you about the business. It began with a few pigs in deep South Trinidad on 10 acres of acquired land. Add dedication, foresight, and quest for knowledge, family involvement and support. So they show you that is a family business to start the mining pigs on farms, right? I want to start the business. As simple as it may sound, this one family's recipe for success in the meat processing industry from the humble beginnings of rearing pigs at the back of his father's shop, right? There's who his father was, right? At the back of his father's shop. Rupert Leon Piao. Hear the name? Rupert Leon Piao, his wife Joyce, and their children expanded the dream over a period of 30 years to create the regional acclaimed meat processing factory known today as Erin Meat Packers Limited. Who would I ever thought? I saw people in Trinidad here don't even know that is a Chinese man own Erin Farm. That is to show you, and this Erin Farm is one of the biggest supplier of meat in the whole of Trinidad and Tobago. You understand? And imagine where they start from. Indentureship, because why? They get that kickstart. That land where they give out, and all the monies they give them, and all the monies they make, and when they set up shop, and they still trust black people. You understand? And put them in debt. All that money they make, they're able now to set up shop big time in Trinidad today. All right? So then now, so the own Erin Farm Meat Packers Limited, right? Then it go down to say now, the family really began sinking their teeth into the meat business when the ever aspiring Rupert, right, the same Chinese man, became co-founder of Mac Foods Limited. And that's why they talk about the two in the article before. Because the man who owns Erin Farm is a co-founder of Mac Foods Limited. So now they're controlling the meat industry in Trinidad. Right? And it's a dominant supplier of pork products. Understand? So, just as I was saying before, if black Hispanic people in Trinidad, right, could follow that one law, understand? Imagine a whole factory going down the drain. You understand? Because we win the pork. Understand? And their products break down into ham and bacon and sausage, all that. They wouldn't be able to sell. Because the majority of people in Trinidad is blacks, Hispanics, and Native Indians. We who supporting their business. Understand? And that to show you how they know how to corner people in the industry. What's how some women want to kill the husband because they don't have a ham for Christmas. Understand where I'm from? That's how serious that Christmas spirit is. And these nations set up themselves to benefit from it easy. Understand? And you don't know what's the name of the farm? The name of the farm is Erin Farm. You would never believe that Chinese owned business. Mac Foods. You would never believe that a Chinese own business. Imagine that. You understand where I'm from? Because why? I know this could be say what the cover the faces there. You understand? We not the judges at the other game. Them set up themselves now. You understand where I'm from? Right? In positions to totally dominate the black man. And bracketaya why I was shy for commanding GEN.YAHANNA. Because things like this, we will never know these things, and we'll just be living in the dark. You understand? And the nations will just keep raping and pillaging we until we become nothing on the face of the earth. You understand? Right? So the owner Erin Farms has become the co-founder of Mac Foods Limited. During this time, Erin Farm was one of the major producers of pork, right? So them is the major producer of pork in Trinidad, right? And Tobago, so the two islands, right? Supplying approximately 75% of the local supermarkets, restaurants, and high-quality products of the family-oriented service. So them have the Chinese have 75%, right, are the pork meat industry in Trinidad. You understand? 1.5 million people. You understand where I'm from? Imagine how much money they're making selling selling unlawful meat. You understand? I to show you millions of dollars, right? In the 1990s, Glut created a surplus of pork, right, and spurred the family decision to enter into the meat processing industry, right? In the 1990s, that had too much pork, right? So that they entered the meat and processing industry. This in 1992 marked the birth of the Erin Meat Packers subsidiary of the Erin Limited that would handle the processing and the marketing of Erin Farm. And that was in 1992. They started to get too much pork, so they separate the farm from and also make a processing factory. So they make their own processing factory. So now they'll have enough. They'll have the machinery now to process all this excess pork that they keep having. You understand? Right? The manufacturers of 35 unique flavored meat products, right? Pork, beef, turkey, and chicken. Erin Meat Packers Limited is responsible for ensuring superior quality of meat output. This unwavering commitment, right, to excellence established the Erin Farm brand as the prime cut. You understand? Because of course they just dominate the market. You understand where I'm from? And that is the only choice people have. Yeah, come like you don't have other choice, because the others, the next 25% of the market, nobody know them. That is, as people see when they go in the grocery and they see a meat package and it's not a brand name, it's not Erin or Arawak or one of them kind of thing, they're not buying it. You understand where I'm from? And that to show you how the Chinese push themselves and dominate themselves in the meat market. Easy like that. You understand where I'm from? And a lot of people don't know. All right? I just want to play this one more clip, and then you will just read a few scriptures from it, and you end it off, right?
Yeah.
Right. This clip, this is a clip, right, with a Edomite journalist, right? Now, this Edomite journalist living in Trinidad, right? But he make a clipping about the Chinese movement in Trinidad and how they were starting to grow bigger, right? And he's a journalist for the online news house, a news house called 868, right? And we will see now, we will go to it brief because we come up on the time, how Chinese started to make their way up in Trinidad in modern day Trinidad and Tobago today, right?
Persistence in China. 2.2 billion TT dollars to be paid in China.
Docking facilities in the break.
Will be known as Chinatown.
For a gift from China, $201 million claimed under $1.1 billion contract with Chinese firms.
This video explores Trinidad and Tobago's growing dependency on China.
Alright, this is that building scene here, alright, and they were explaining what that building is, right? And how important that building is to the Chinese, right?
Just behind me right there is the largest Chinese embassy in all of the Caribbean.
Right, so the building we just watched, that big building, is the Chinese embassy in Trinidad and Tobago. But that building is the largest, the market is China's largest regional embassy opens in Trinidad. Right? A lot of people didn't even know that. You understand? So out of all the islands, China set up the biggest one in Trinidad.
the Chinese embassy was always in this current location here. This embassy was moved here and upgraded in November 2018. The embassy, with its large swimming pools and tennis courts, was praised by the Chinese ambassador for coming as a result of fruitful relationships between both.
Right, so they say inside the embassy, right, the government even built swimming pool and tennis court for them. And that's first they want them to be at home and at comfort, right?
With Trinidad and China.
That's a palace.
So Trinidad and Tobago is already over $2 billion in debt to China. That's nearly half of the total country's debt deficit.
Right? So $2 billion will be in debt to China. It is more than they Trinidad now, right?
Despite all of this, China's going to pour more money into the country and conduct more of its gigantic construction projects. The existing debt to China is for multi-million-dollar construction projects that have taken place in the past. Napa, Sapa, the Brian Lara Stadium, the Velodrome and Aquatic Center.
All right, I want to go back a little bit.
China is for multi-million-dollar construction projects that have taken place in the past. Napa, Sapa.
Right, so they say Napa, right? So we know the Napa is a big art center that the Chinese build in Trinidad, right? Then you have Sapa, which is the next one to build in South in San Fernando, right? Which is two major big art centers that are built locally here in Trinidad, right? These would look like.
The Brian Lara Stadium.
Right, they built the Brian Lara Stadium, right? For people who don't know, who maybe watching from outside and don't know who's Brian Lara. Brian Lara was a sportsman, he was a cricketer in Trinidad, and he became famous when he broke the world record, right? So the Chinese built that stadium in Trinidad, and they also built the aquatic center and velodrome in Trinidad. This is also in Trinidad, right? And this is one of the best velodromes that I have in the world. People from outside has come to train in Trinidad locally down here, right? And this was also a Chinese project. So four of the biggest project that ever built in Trinidad was done by the Chinese, right?
The Cuba Children's Hospital, and that's
right? And also the Children's Hospital.
In 2011, China invested 5.7 billion TT dollars into the company Atlantic LNG and acquired a 10% stake in the organization.
Right. So China now, right? If I could stop it there, China now move from just groceries and mini mart and palanting and going into a bigger scale. They're going into construction. And now they're investing into energy, right? Which is the Atlantic LNG plan. So the plan built, but then now them come and make an investment in the plan that already built, right?
I don't think we're dependent on China because I think that we have
this here is an East Indian, right? Now she's studying the relations between China and Trinidad and Tobago, right? Because China starting to become so a heavy player in Trinidad that the other nations now started to become worried, right?
Interest in them because in terms of the loans that are very much appealing to the government, like with majority of the countries that go to China for loans then.
Right, so they say plenty countries just go to China for loans because the terms that they're giving you very favorable. You understand? So they're offering you big money with and they can get them little back in. You don't have no back in to get this loan, right?
you have somewhat of a concessionality, meaning that they give you at a cheaper interest rate or something, and that is more appealing for countries as opposed to going through the stringent conditions of the IMF and the World Bank. That is sort of why countries then pursue China more than, and I mean, it goes both ways. China pursues countries as well. It's not just that developing countries are going to China. It's a back and forth.
When Kamala Bissau was the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the Chinese president paid the Caribbean a visit and promised that he would pump a lot more money into the region.
I certainly did not frown when the new Chinese president told us in Port Spain recently that China was going to invest $3 billion US in the Caribbean.
Right? So this here is the Prime Minister of Barbados, right? And he's saying now, he was surprised, right, that China invests $3 billion US. So what's all the money they invest in Trinidad? But overall, they invest $3 billion US in the Caribbean countries. You understand? Because they're already them looking long term, them setting up the self to put the claw in all the different Caribbean islands. You understand? That is where them set the foothold in the Caribbean. So them coming to lay the stake. So just how it was in slavery, remember when Britain and all the Dutch colonies and the Spanish fighting for the different Caribbean islands? The same thing going on today. But China now find their foothold now today. So they're now able to have the power to do it.
This is a promise that he has kept 100%. We've seen massive infrastructure in Jamaica. We're seeing a lot more stuff that is going to be coming to Trinidad. We have the massive Labyrinth port that is set to be built. We have the redesigning of the Port of Spain General Hospital. We had a HDC homes that were going to be built. That was cancelled. And we have other things coming as well from the Chinese government. This is another worry factor right here, because in countries in the past where China has pumped billions of dollars, once those countries fail to pay back that debt, China will then seize that infrastructural development.
Yeah, go ahead, Osabaya.
Yeah. As you touch on it, the way describing it in Chinese trap.
Yeah, so them know, and the reason why they're bringing up this trap and bringing it to the public away, to the public be away, is because they don't want the Chinese to take that foothold. Because remember now, them was already here. White people was already here running things. And the East Indian had a stake. Now the Chinese piece of the pie getting too big. So the nation warring over now who will have power in Trinidad. And understand why the black man down in the bottom, because he's the pie. So it's like they have all the big bunch, all the black, Hispanic, and Native Indian people, right? We is who making that pie function, and everybody fighting over that piece of pie. You understand? Right? So that when I read the Psalms and the nation form a tumult, all of them know exactly what's going on, and they know why black people in the bottom. But all of them they're fighting among themselves now because they're just debating who should have that power. You understand?
And also, in many cases, the land surrounding.
So as I rightfully saying, the trap is when you can't pay, they're taking the land. So that's how, and just like how back in the days, right? Like when they used to trust you. You understand? They used to give you the goods, they give you the advance. So they use that favorable term to gain power over the customers of the market. But now they're able now to give big loans, and the reward is that I will give you the loan. You can spend the money how you want, but if you can't pay back, I'm taking whatever property that they owe me for. Understand? So whatever project, that whole area will be mine. So them will be living in China and own land in Trinidad. The government of China. That's how it is. Understand? So then now them could come and set up their own shop and bring their own people, because they rightfully own that piece of land and whatever Caribbean state that they take back that property from. All right?
term death trap then is one of the terms that the Chinese they need using, and for them it's not seen as a death trap, but like in the instance of what happened in Singapore, in parts of Africa, it's also happening where it is countries are given this nice package, yes, and you get some sort of incentive then of money, materials, or labor to build certain projects, and then it comes down to the fact that countries cannot repay their loan, and that becomes a problem because in the case of Sri Lanka, they had to give up their port, they also had to give up 15,000 acres of land.
The reality is that Africa has suffered greatly in the hands of its colonial masters.
And even the Africans balling because them already experienced where we Negroes now going to experience, but them already passed through it because them done in it and they realize they're in hot water, right?
What we face today is a new Europe in Africa, and that's China.
Even though they gave the whole idea of a death trap, it's being seen in the international system that China is pushing forward a death trap or death trap diplomacy then, in a sense. We have a 50-50 perspective then, based on interviews that would have been done. For some people, they are worried. They want to know how many generations are going to have to pay out this loan. What are the concessionalities?
Right. Now, this is an East Indian studying the Chinese, right? And here she talking about them trying to calculate how much generations they go take to pay off the loan. So you see what I'm thinking? That is to show you. You understand? The low state, the black, the Hispanic, we can't even have time to think about that because we're starting to go to work, to go to school, to pay bills, right? Where else are buyer?
Yeah, the Chinese and them basically do this like monopoly, buying out the whole board.
That's right. You understand? You understand? They're playing real life monopoly.
Yeah.
You understand? And the final way, you understand, to come in these third world countries and buy out everything on the board. You understand? Just like monopoly, buy out all the train station and all and set up hotel.
Yeah,
and everybody paying rent.
Yeah.
You understand? So that the final way to monopolize the system. Yeah. And it making now, right? Because the journalist, right? He decided to investigate this story because he background, like either my background. And when he come to interview this East Indian, she talking about them studying now how much generations we gotta live to pay off that debt. And that's where I come from because I realize now plenty of the goods and services will be coming from these Chinese people. You understand? So them and all worried about because it's like you're getting a new landlord then over you. You understand? And that's what they going. So the white man on top and all the others below, struggling and battling for the feeding ground. You understand?
How long or what are the terms of repayment, that sort of thing. But then on the other side, you do have people who are welcoming the opportunities in terms of, like, for example, the Liberal Dry Docking facility. There were members of the community who they were very much welcoming in the sense that they were looking for employment, local.
Right. So a lot of people now glad when it coming because we can't see the big picture. You understand? We don't know we will work. You understand? Because we suffering really bottom. So that's the trap they're using. So they're saying, all right, you will work, no problem. You understand? We will give all the government enough investment to invest, but if they can't pay it back, we taking it. You understand? So the government between our place now, well, I want to give the people work, but if we can't pay back, this whole piece of area here could end up selling to our next country. And I can tell you how the heavy negotiations has been going on between these world leaders. You understand? And how now these governments are trying to put one another in a grip. You understand? And the perfect candidate for putting people in grip is the white man. You understand? And everybody learning that trade and coming now and use it on them who lower than them. Yeah.
employment within the villages around the dry docking facility. They were also looking forward to greater development.
Now, people can either see this entire thing, China investing heavily in Trinidad, as either good or bad. Good for employment opportunities, perhaps, and developmental opportunities, but perhaps negative in the fact that we may not be able to pay back those loans, and see what has happened to other countries happen to us as well.
All right, so I'll go hold it up, Dave, because you're coming up on the time, right? I thought a lot more, but I'm going to make a part 2 to this, right? But this is just a brief history to show you what already going on in Trinidad. All right, it's a history class with Officer Makakobal, who brought out on the East Indians, and their role and how they trying to set up for economic power as well. Understand? Right, and even camp leader Officer Galawan brought out on the 1% in Trinidad. Understand? So you're seeing the striving between for that power, right, locally down here, and the people who in the mid side is the Black, Hispanic, and Native Indian people, right? So I just want you to read a scripture here for me, and then we'll close it off. All right, you give me Zephaniah chapter 2, and you can read from verse 7, Baba Kusha.
The book of Zephaniah 2 and verse 7. And the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall feed thereupon in the houses of Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening. For the Lord their God shall visit them and turn away their captivity.
Right, and the Lord saying at that time that the Lord would turn away Judah captivity. Right, Judah is the head tribe of Israel. So the Lord looking to come and remove that captivity from Judah. And once the captivity removed from Judah, you'll know all Israel following behind, right? Go ahead.
Verse 8. I have heard the reproach of Moab and the revelings of the children of Ammon.
Right, so the Mosai say he heard the reproach of Moab, which is the Chinese, and the revelings of the children of Ammon, which is the Japanese, right? So he hearing about them. They're making waves on the earth, right? Go ahead.
Whereby they have reproached my people and magnify themselves against their border.
That's right. Understand? So now, right, the Chinese now start to reproach the Lord's people. They started to reproach the Black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man. They started to take advantage of we now. Now they starting to use we and magnify themselves as gods against all the nations, all the places the Most High people is, right? Go ahead.
Verse 9. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel.
All right, so the God of Israel, the God of the Black, the Hispanic, and the Native Indian man saying this. Go ahead.
Surely Moab shall be as Sodom, and the children of Ammon as Gomorrah.
And the Mosai, there's a prophecy from the Mosai. He say he go turn the children of Moab and the children of Adam like Sodom and Gomorrah. He utterly destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. Go ahead.
Even the breeding of nettles and salt pits and a perpetual desolation.
Right, and you say you go make them a perpetual desolation. And understand? So this is the ego really put it in on them and totally destroy them. Go ahead.
the residue of my people shall spoil them.
Right? And you say what? Moab, you see the Chinese and Ammon, the Japanese, right? The remnant of the people, the people who survive all that place, the people who he deliver, we will possess them. Go ahead.
And the remnant of my people shall possess them.
Go down to verse 10.
Verse 10. This shall they have for their pride, because they have reproached and magnified themselves against the people of the Lord of hosts.
That's right. So because they take advantage of the black, the Hispanic, and the native Indian man, right? We will now possess them. Understand? And because of the magnify and bring the Lord's people to a reproach. Understand? So the Lord saying that day will come when the black, the Hispanic, and the native Indian man will possess, understand, the Chinese. So when you look at today and you see all the Chinese making all the moves, right? This is their time. But the most I say that time coming when them same people who want to take advantage, the same people on Lavantil and Charlotte Street or other turn Charlotte Street into Chinatown, and they make all the different advantage and take advantage of Trinidad and the black people in Trinidad and the Hispanic man and the native Indian man, or they're taking the Venezuelan girls and turning them into prostitutes. The Lord said the day will come and them will be repossession. All right. So I ain't gonna go no further because 9 o'clock is the Black Watch commanding GEN.YAHANNA. Right. So I'll close it up and I will pass the class on to Priest and Officer Barriat. All right.
Security announcements. We at the I.S.U.P.K. out of 1 West 125th Street, Harlem, New York, under commanding General Yahanna. New rules for brothers and sisters. When a new brother or a sister comes into the school, they are off limits for 6 months. They are to be saluted only. They are here to shed themselves of the world. After 6 months, if a brother or a sister has an interest in a particular person, he or she must get permission from the head to speak to a brother or a sister. There is another 6 months in which the brother or sister will court each other. After this 6-month period, the brother or sister will get permission from the head to marry. Tithes, which is a commandment, you can find this in Numbers 18 to 21 and Malachi 3, 8 to 10. Means tenth in Hebrew and is pronounced Ma'ashera. 10% of every penny of any increase the Lord gives you, give to the Treasury Department or teacher. Priest fund, free will offering for priests, not mandatory. Whatsoever amount you would like to give. Upcoming holy convocations.
Right. The upcoming holy convocation is the Feast of Dedication, which is known as Hanukkah, on the 25th day of the 9th month by the Feast of 8 days. It will be on Wednesday, the 9th December 2020. You can find this in Maccabees chapter 4, verses 52 to 61.
Remind Akium and Aquapium to check on social media such as ISUPK.com, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and so on for I.S.U.P.K events and materials. If a brother wants to be a trooper in the school, then he is to start wearing all black, which includes black boots, like shirts, like pants, like headbands or scarf. And with that, see I mentioned. Turn to the east. We'll say the Lord's Prayer in the Hebrew. Abanawa, Shabashemaya, Kwadash, Haya, Shamka, Yahawa, Malakwaka, Taba'a, Ratazaka, Haya, Aisha, Barataza, Kawa, Haya, Bashamaya, Natan Lanawa, Lakam, Kal, Yawam, Wasalak Nanawa, Kawawak Nanawa, Kasalak Nanawa, Kawawak Nanawa, Kala, Tabanawa, Banasayawan, Abal, Hawashanawa, Hawashinawa, Mayan, Rai, Kaya, Laka, Amalakwa, Waha'ala, Wahataparat, Lamiam, Aman. What we said in the English was, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, Yahweh, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth, as it is in heaven, Give us this day, our daily bread, and forgive us, our debts, as we forgive our debtors, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil, for thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. So be it. So, let's give the teacher one courtesy salute. I imagine Shabbat. I imagine Barak. Yahweh Hashem Yahushai Brakatah. Yahweh Hashem Yahushai Brakatam. Ajimata. Let's give the sisters online one courtesy salute. I imagine Shabbat. I imagine Barak. Yahweh Shema Alatan Ba'Hashem Yahushai. Ajimata. Class dismissed.